All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Sound Bites for business, innovation, technology, entrepreneurship, and strategy. Today, we're really excited because we have Daniel Price with us today, who is the CEO and co-founder of Ioterra. In Ioterra, you're building an ecosystem and marketplace that's dedicated to product development and product development that lets people get to their solutions faster, right? You're connecting solutions providers, development partners, and founders to get to solutions in a much more meaningful and effective way. So Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, super happy to be here, Derek and Lauren. Thanks for having me. And that's exactly right, Derek. Ioterra exists to help companies develop and launch products faster. And there's a ton of pieces in that puzzle, but the high level is let's get more products out there that are cool with a higher success rate with a shorter time span. So really happy to dig into it with you guys because I think there's a lot of alignment with the nano chomp philosophy as well.
Yeah, that's why we're so excited to have you. But before we hear about Ioterra, why don't you tell us about where you came from and how you got to where you are?
Okay, so I mean, am I going back to day zero?
Yeah, start from birth, and then
Yeah,
we'll
okay.
it'll be a 5 hour long podcast.
Yeah, I was told I learned how to walk quite early, so signs of brilliance.
This does not surprise us.
um, no, so my formal background is engineering, and as you listen to me even for a minute or two, you'll figure that out. That I very much think with the left brain. I got my COVID vaccine like I don't know a couple. I think it was my second one, and I was just chatting with the nurse, and she's like, "Are you an engineer? I can always spot you guys." But yeah, so
what were you
training,
saying?
who knows? Um,
It's like you don't know whether to be complimented or offended when that happens, right?
It's a mix of both, probably. I'll say both.
So yeah, biomedical engineering undergrad and grad school, and then from there I jumped into small businesses and startups. So my first job out of college was at a medical device company. They were a Series A startup out of Seattle, and it was pretty interesting to see a company that was at this stage. We were building mouth guards and helmet pieces for concussion monitoring. And it's kind of neat as a recently graduated student. We'd have these famous athletes coming in, and we're rigging them up with sensors. And my project in particular was to get the wireless charging and the wireless data transfer working on the mouth guard. As you can imagine, the mouth is not really a friendly or conducive spot for electronics. A, they have to be very small. B, they're constantly getting bitten. Saliva is corrosive. It was a very hard project. I didn't do a very good job, but that was my project at this first company I had, and then from there I worked a couple different jobs. I was the head of electrical engineering at a robotics company making camera robotic arms, which is very neat. These things mount on top of cars for like chase scenes or race scenes. And when you're doing a race scene, you're typically dealing with nice cars, right? Like Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff that as a 21-year-old, like I was extremely excited to be around. So that was a company called Motocrane. And then I worked at a healthcare company for a little bit called Decina. But I was kind of chomping at the bit to get into business, particularly because in all of these companies, I had felt like the engineering that we did was so much harder than it needed to be. There was a lot of reinventing the wheel. Now this was kind of early IoT stuff, so we were building these software connected hardware stacks. It felt like we shouldn't be writing our own Bluetooth driver code from scratch, but there just wasn't any other alternatives out there. So like I was kind of forming this notion in my mind that there was really something in stitching together this IoT space, but I didn't have any formal business training. So I went to school, I got my MBA, and then around, I guess this brings us to 2015, I started my first company, which is called Breadware. And I did that with a co-founder. I had the sort of electrical engineering, product design background. He had a manufacturing and mechanical background. He'd been a lecturer at UCSB beforehand, and his name was also Daniel. So it immediately led to all sorts of confusion. And then we proceeded to hire a few more Daniels. I don't know if it's hiring bias or what exactly, but we then Breadware, we created some stringent rules where I went by Daniel, he went by Danny, the other one went by Dan, just so that we could keep track of everyone.
Yeah, the variable names have to be discrete, or else you get overloading, right?
Exactly. So Breadware initially, it was very focused on medical device product development and complex type products, right? The products that had the security, had the software connected stack, early IoT. Um, as the company grew, we continued to stay in the IoT space and carve out a niche there. But we added firmware development, we added some software, we added mechanical, and then we got into these other industries. We got into consumer electronics, we got
Hmm.
into agricultural tech, some industrial equipment. Um, During this time, around when we hit 10 people, we decided like, boy, it's really expensive to be in California and run a company. Like, it's nice to look at the ocean from my window, but like,
Yeah.
maybe there's other options. So we kind of canvassed the different cities that were rapidly growing in the US, and we wound up moving to Reno, Nevada. So I've been in Reno the last 5 years. We moved the headquarters of Breadware here. Very much have liked it. It's as close as you can be to the Bay Area and not live inside the state of California. Um, Easy to get down to Vegas for all the trade shows or bachelor parties or whatever it is that one might be doing in Vegas. And then, for me, very close to the mountains. Snowboarding, skiing's always been a big part of how I like to spend my winters. But I digress. So, Breadware, IoT focused in Nevada. It grew to about 30 people, 35 people up and over the years. And it wound up in 2019 and early 2020 getting acquired by one of our customers, which was
Oh,
exciting.
cool.
Like for me, that was a whole life cycle of a company that I got to do. With all of the holes that we fell in along the way, tons of mistakes made, but kind of got to go see a whole life cycle. And it was from Breadware and kind of like in that merger at the end that we actually split out an experiment that we had been doing in Breadware called the Breadware Marketplace. Um, and this was an initiative to create this ecosystem of many, many solution companies and many, many service companies that do something in the IoT space and kind of lead share so that a customer could find the best solution or service company to suit their needs. And it was kind of this loose referral affiliate network at that time.
Sure.
But when we spun it out, we formed it as its own entity. That was when Ioterra began. And then, boom, a pandemic hit, and so Ioterra has been its own exciting roller coaster. But that's the quick summary of my last 5 or 6 years.
That's awesome. I think you buried the lead in a few places, so I'm going to highlight them. So when we were going through your background, you did mention your bioengineering, but that degree's from Berkeley, and then you got your master's degree in engineering from Oxford, and then your MBA from Oxford. So we were looking at your credentials, immediately felt like we needed to step the game
Just
up
like
on our
joining
credentials.
certificate programs
Yeah,
just to
something.
try
God,
to get on
please.
your level very quickly.
Well,
So
hey, I appreciate that, but turns out studying in Oxford is mostly drinking at the pub. Who knew? Turns out there's
Sounds
151
great.
pubs within the Oxford city limits. And if you ever email a professor and say like, hey, can we meet? Can we discuss this? Whatever. Even if you're going to an office hours, it'll be at a pub. So
Again,
missed
it's you're
missed
you're still
opportunity.
selling it. Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds great.
You're making it sound even more amazing. Oh no, that's amazing. And then building your company, building Breadware, sounds like you guys had a really great opportunity, right? You saw the market need, you then built the right team, you then started building solutions, and then had like the dream, get it acquired and be able to go do something else interesting, solve new problems. What did you learn along that journey? Like, what was the most notable thing that stood out to you along that path?
um, well, I'll tell it with a bit of sidestepping the direct question. I'll get back to it. Um, we didn't start Ioterra to be a services product development company. That
Hmm.
was not the intent. We sort of fell into that through failing to be a product company. So when we started Breadware, the initial product that we launched was called the Breadware Megabee, and it was a rapid prototyping kit dedicated to help R&D teams very quickly in a Lego modular style put together both a hardware prototype, a mobile app prototype, and a software cloud prototype. Like there was kind of a full suite. Um, and I'm giving a talk on this later today on the importance of doing both product marketing and product development hand in hand when you're launching a company. Um, this was me fresh out of my MBA school, so I had a business hat on, but I was still an engineer by training in the way I thought, and so we developed the crap out of this thing, and in my opinion, had a very sleek product that worked well, and then just no one knew about it or could understand the feature set until after we had launched it. Um, and what was surprising to us, and what ultimately created the trajectory of Breadware, was that this Megabee kit that we created didn't land and resonate with the market that we expected it to. So we created it for small, medium business and R&D teams within larger enterprises to be able to quickly put together POCs and get maybe budget funding approval for the next stage. Um, when we presented it to them, what we got was, wow, this is very cool. This team is clearly capable. Why don't we hire you to use your kit and build our stuff? And we're like, no, that's not right. We don't want the money. We want you to buy this kit for $180. They're like, no, we don't want to do that. Here, we'll add another zero to the check. Like, here, just use it and develop the stuff for us. And so it was kind of by mishap that the services started within Breadware, by simply failing to sell the Megabee kits to our target customers, but then new opportunities arising as a result of that. Consequently, the Megabee did start selling well within university environments. So it started selling to like University of California, Stanford, University of Texas. Like, they were buying them and they were using them to teach their intro electronics courses. But that wasn't really the market that at the time we thought we were going after. So we made the decision to really just lean into the services work, and we used that to then bootstrap and hire the initial team. So the big learning was just the importance of, and this will align with nano chomp messaging, defined, message, test, iterate, rinse, repeat, which is not what we did. We were doing things in much bigger blocks and then having bigger learnings and bigger pivots after. And so it's a lesson that stuck with me quite saliently over the years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's a path that as an engineer, a lot of us go down. We were at a place where, and we've seen companies that'll take a really big marketing budget, a really big product budget, in this case, I'll use a specific example. It was a $6 million budget to build a product to market before they released it and put it in front of anyone, right? And then you have this really amazingly beautiful, elegant solution that no one cared about the most expensive features of, right? Yeah. So, like the most really interesting, time-consuming, elegant, artful pieces of it, no one gave a shit about at all. And so you could have saved maybe $4 million of development costs, but not including those, and still had the same outcome. And it's a tough lesson to learn. And even when you read Lean Startup or somebody tells it to you, you still end up being like, no, this is going to work. I know this idea is going to work. It's going to resonate. And then sometimes it doesn't. And so you just the test and iterate approach early on can get really, really interesting results. And it's awesome that, where you started got you to where you are because you were able to iterate through it.
Yes, certainly being an entrepreneur has taught me opportunism, right? Because it's just the best laid plans don't quite come together. So it's constantly being vigilant. But what I'm trying to continue figuring out how to get better at is when to trust my gut and when not to, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to have this sixth sense, right? You're talking about the features that people really want. Oh, they just don't know they want it yet, right? This is Ford Model T, right? No, people don't actually want a faster horse. They want this car. So when to trust your gut, when not to, and how to use data to figure out if your gut is inclining you in the right direction. I'm not great at it yet, but continuing to be a student.
Lauren.
Yeah, I was thinking about your story, and when you were putting your prototype in front of who you thought was your target audience, and they were like, "Can you just do it for us?" Why do you think that they didn't want to do it, and they would rather you do it instead? They had the internal folks who could have done it, right? But they just didn't feel like it, or what did you learn from that encounter that made you want to start this this project that you're working on now?
Yeah, well, I think it was a misunderstanding that I had of how they see their finish line. What I was giving them was a great solution to save a couple weeks to get to a viable POC and then get budget approval. Mm-hmm. However, that's not the finish line. The finish line is product in the market, or maybe product in the market and recouped the initial ROI. So they were looking at a longer time horizon. And while the product that we had might be able to save them, some time here. It didn't really change the latter game, the latter
Hmm.
half, the end game. And so that's why their stance was, well, if you guys are able to do this, like, can we engage you and you can help us throughout the whole product life cycle, and maybe we can
Mhm.
reel in, something that's a more significant timeline and more significant budget. Um, so that's
Because they
that's
already
where
know
I
you're the
think that we
expert.
missed. And had we done more interviews at the beginning, we probably would have gotten that. Even though people did tell us, like, man, this prototyping thing is cool. Um, I don't think that we heard the whole story amidst that feedback. Probably seeking our own confirmation bias.
Sure.
Yeah, I think back to your Model T analogy, I think what a lot of people do is even when they try to go really customer focused, they'll be like, okay, we're going to be super customer focused, listen to what the customer says and build that. Well, a lot of the problem is they're not doing true strategic problem solving. So they'll hear what the customer says and then they'll go build that, but without hearing what problem that customer is trying to solve. Like the customer's communicating to you a solution to the problem they're actually trying to solve. And so,
Right.
like the faster horse thing, it's if you got to the real problem, the problem was they wanted to move more material from point A to point B faster without the strain of having an animal pull it, right? It's like, or that could have been the not having an animal pull it piece is the feature, I
Hmm.
suppose, right? But the ultimate goal isn't just a faster horse. It's I want to move more cargo at a quicker velocity for a longer distance. And in that case, it's like, okay, well, a horse isn't the answer. So I think like getting to that point is the tough part of innovation, because like our customers do it too. They will tell you the answer to the question they think they have, and then you've got to like dig to get behind that to find out what's the actual problem they're trying to solve with this. What's the real objective? That's tough. It can be really tough sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a conversational art, and it's a cognitive art that just takes time to practice. Some people maybe have a knack for it, but I think everyone, it takes time to practice and really hone.
I also think it's interesting that who you thought your target audience was, it was not those people. It was actually in the education space. So I wonder if, like, had there been some testing done up front, you could have really leaned into that harder. And have you taken that sort of lesson learned to Ioterra?
Have I taken that lesson learned to Ioterra?
Not a trick
I
question.
mean, yeah, I'd like to think so. Um, but yeah, like at the time, the education market just wasn't where we were going.
Hmm.
And I sometimes wonder, had we really leaned into the education market, selling our kits at 180 a pop, what Breadwork could have looked like, rather than leaning into the services route with the commercial enterprises, and then utilizing the kit that we had to then basically um, be a fishing lure to win new business. So that was the strategy that we had adopted. Um, with Ioterra, the thinking that we had when we built this company, and it still preserves today after several years and many customers using us, is that product development is extremely fragmented, and there's many specialized players that are extremely good at what they do, but figuring out what they do can be extremely hard unless you yourself are also a specialized player in their exact domain. Um, and I don't see this changing in any near term. Yes, there's consolidation forces in the market. There's companies like Amazon and Google Cloud that are going to own some of the data pieces. But as Industry 4.0 and digital transformation continues to emerge and blossom, we're going to continue seeing kind of specialized niches in healthcare, in heavy industry, in defense tech. And you're going to have specialized players, both selling solutions and doing custom services there. So given that, there's also many stages to a product development journey. What a company needs at the front end, strategy, architecture, planning, is different than what they need at maybe the prototyping stage, which is different than what they need at the manufacturing certification launch stage.
Mhm.
And this was the point that we had missed in that mega B story I was telling you at the beginning, where we kind of zoomed in on just that one domain. Um, Ioterra is set up very simply as as like a Yelp, right? A Yelp of ratings and reviews for product development services and solutions to help a company in a particular domain at a particular stage in their journey identify the right folks to hire or to buy from. So So that's the play. It's a horizontal play, right? Which is a very different ecosystem move than a vertical play. And that comes with its own pluses and minuses. The minus being Hofstadter's law, if you're familiar with that law, Derek.
Let's explain this one out
All right, Hofstadter's law.
as if
One of
I'm
my
5 years old.
For me, you guys are doing this for me.
I'm good as for me.
Yeah, one of my favorites, though the team's annoyed of hearing it. It'll take longer than you expect, even when taking into account Hofstadter's law. That's Hofstadter's law. It's a recursive law. Um, and I feel like it's very true for a marketplace, because a marketplace is nothing until it's something, right? You're slowly adding on more sellers, you're slowly adding in more content, but it's too small. It's too small to be useful. No buyers want to use it because they can't find what they need, and therefore sellers aren't ready to join until all of a sudden something clicks, and then you have that critical mass. And that's been the challenge of putting together a horizontal play. And I think we're now at about that stage where there's enough content and enough activity where it's useful for both sides, which now makes it exciting because accretion then starts to happen very quickly. But yeah, I now have a whole new set of learnings on building a horizontal business that I would put to work next time if I ever wind up doing it again.
Yeah, anytime you're doing a multi-ended business model that ultimately is powered by the numbers of the network, that's tough. That's tough because you have to determine which side of the business model am I going to subsidize first to try and get the second side, and then how am I going to get those early solutions and early wins to be able to get referral based. Like, I guess you'd call that a virality coefficient. That's definitely a challenge. It's kind of like boiling water. It's not boiling until it's boiling.
Exactly.
You know?
I think it brings up an interesting question. So as you're waiting for this nothing to become something, how do you stay motivated and how do you stay excited about the project?
That's a good one. So A is the mission focus of where we're trying to go, and then B is some of the shenanigans that we did along the way. And I think the combination of those two is what kept me interested, engaged, as well as the team. So the mission focus on where we're trying to go. I think that product development is extremely hard. I think it's especially insanely, exorbitantly more hard when you're doing advanced product development that combines software and hardware and supply chain and certification. I also think that there's a dearth of openness when you bring in the world of hardware relative to what you see in the software realms and the evolution of open software over the last couple decades. So, what I really want is to create this ecosystem that promotes sharing concepts, sharing ideology, and helping create just a path, a map, a set of road signs, so that companies that are embarking on this difficult innovation journey, at least this part can be well defined. So that's kind of what we see. The values that we've instilled in the company to get there are four things. One, work smart. That's kind of the mentality of what we want to bring in the whole industry, but what we try to do internally as well. One team, right? We're both a team as well as we want the platform to operate as a team. Don't be a robot. There's a lot of nerds here, but we want them to have fun at work and to just really bring their own personality and vibrancy to what they're doing. Then the last one for any rock climbers listening, send it, which means like it's nothing until it's something, right? You just gotta believe. You gotta hurl it, and see what happens. Send it as if you're on a rock climbing cliff face and you can't reach the next thing. You really have to just go for it and hope. So that's send it. And then the shenanigans along the way, as we were getting the ecosystem up and running, we initially onboarded all of our sellers on a referral basis, so like a commission base. So if they got any business, we would take a little cut. That allowed us to get a little bit revenue, but for them to join with zero risk. We also did a handful of consulting projects as we were getting started, just so that we could bring in some income. We could utilize the knowledge in the team to help both sellers market themselves better in products, find the right buy versus build options. As things started to coalesce, we moved away from the commission model because it was A, complicated, and B, honor code based. Like we didn't exactly know how much people are getting paid.
Yeah.
Worked great when we had a small ecosystem and we knew personally all of the vendors. But it starts to erode as the ecosystem grows. So we switched everything to a subscription model on the seller side, cleaner, easier, and there's now kind of a proven ecosystem. So like we could be comfortable asking for something from the sellers.
Sure.
And
There's a
then
true like return on their investment by being part of the
exactly. And then we toned down the amount of consulting that we were doing. So we just focused purely on building up the two sides of the ecosystem. So I'm sure there could have been better formulas to get up and running, but this is the one that we used. And that was kind of the strategy to solve the chicken and the egg. We were doing chicken and egg, during lockdown because Ioterra really got started in early 2020. So that added certain complexities as well. I think some potential pluses. There was a big spike in medical device development innovation because of COVID. And there's also a lot of complexity strewn into product development as a result of supply chain challenges in 2020 up through now. So there are some advantages there, but the downsides were a lot of companies froze their product and R&D budgets just to wait and see what was going to happen. So back to that opportunism, we kind of navigated the pandemic as we could as we were trying to get critical mass in this ecosystem.
No, that makes sense. And the consulting model makes sense too, because like early on you touched on needing to get in front of customers earlier, get feedback earlier so you could pivot your model earlier. And what's nice about the consulting model is your client is actually paying you to tell you what they're needing a solution for versus you having to go in there and pitch. So it's actually kind of clever. Like you're getting paid to help develop your platform even better. And it's a nice model to have. Like we leverage the same stack to be able to do things, because or else you're pitching somebody, you're trying to get feedback, you're in front of that person, and you're burning a lot of clock cycles to get that. But if they're paying you for the discovery and for all of that, it works better, and the outcomes are better for everybody involved.
Well, that's a good pitch. People don't always buy that when I pitch them that, but yeah. I agree with you,
You just
Derek.
record that and replay it.
Yeah. It's not a lie if you believe it. Isn't that the George Costanza quote? Something along those lines. So building your team. So when you're going through this, you're building your platform, you're building both ends of the business model at the same time, putting your team together. What does that look like? How are you finding the people that you want, and how are you helping get them to adopt into your culture? What does that process look like?
That's a good question. Ioterra, by virtue of how it got started, was kind of a spin out from the earlier breadwork company. So I was able to hand select a handful of the members that I had worked with for several years before and bring them into the Ioterra company. So Ioterra kind of had a team from the get-go of about 10 people. As we add people to the team, and we add people both here in the States as well as we're growing an office in Medellin, Colombia. So that's been kind of fun to have a South America, North America contingent to the company. But there's we're a big values-driven company.
Let me stop right there really quickly. And what made you select that? I'm really curious as to what was like Colombia. What made you really go there?
Well, I'll answer that question in a couple ways, both the strategic answer and then the truthful answer. So we've done a lot of work in Breadware. We had a subsidiary in India and still do to this day. So a couple of developers and folks there in the India office. And there's a lot of talent there. There's advantages to the 24-hour work cycle if you can get the cadence down of handing the baton off at the end and beginning of every day. There's a lot of great things of working there. But the 12-hour time change is challenging. And so with South America, like we were able to have a same time zone office. There's a lot of tech that's coming out of Colombia, and there's a very entrepreneurial mindset in most of the South American countries. And so there's alignment with what we're trying to do. I think just in the mentality of the folks that we've hired there. So that's kind of like how and why we got set up with a subsidiary that's in South America. But also, my co-founder has been living in Colombia. So
cool.
He's in Reno, Nevada, but has started to really like that country. He's been going back and forth, and he's like, wow, there's a lot of great talent here. Let's actually invest and spend some time building up a subsidiary. So that's how we wound up in Columbia. It was more through circumstance than strategy, but we backfilled the strategy and it now makes sense to us.
No, I think that's awesome. And when you're building that team in two different locations, even being in the same time zone, have you had challenges, or is it still one big team across both locations?
I mean, it's interesting asking this question now in 2022 relative to asking it to someone in 2019.
That's a
Um,
good point.
like, we're doing most of our meetings through Zoom anyway. We've had a remote culture since mid 2020, a hybrid culture. So the office has been open; people can come in or kind of stay home. Some of the employees have been taking advantage of that to be able to travel and do a little bit of digital nomadism, which is great. Um, I do think that one of the things that you lose with a remote culture or even a hybrid culture is the ability for organic brainstorming. Put a bunch of people in the room, lock the door, give them a pizza, leave a whiteboard in there, and no one comes out until whatever this is has been solved.
Mhm.
So we try to set up the workflows so that strategy, goal setting, and decision making happen together, whether it's in person, ideally, or kind of like a dedicated long format meeting where we can be scribbling on the whiteboard. And so, kind of like goals and things like issues are worked out together. But then once that's been done, there might be a week or a couple weeks worth of work. And then like it can be a little bit more flexible on when people are in the office. Communication gets a little bit easier between these cycles of focus. So
Yeah,
we haven't found that having a split set of locations has affected that negatively.
that makes sense. And I think what's interesting is coming from the engineering world, especially the software development world, having agile processes. That's just the way, right? It's becoming the way now, right? So you get in a room in the beginning of the week or the beginning of the month, you set the goals, you set the objectives, you build out the workflow, people go away, they start working on the independent pieces of work, moving it over to the done column, and then you determine what was accomplished, you reset expectations, et cetera, et cetera. You keep kicking the wheel. What we're
Yeah.
seeing now is more marketing teams are adopting that same flow. So it's like, it's been fascinating.
Yeah, and marketing, so getting marketing onto Agile or Scrum is a very interesting challenge. And we've tried in various formats to do that, some less successfully than others. We utilize EOS traction at Ioterra. You might be familiar with that. It's written originally by a fellow named Gino Wickman. But it's called an operating system for a small business, and it has ways that you can create very accountable and traceable goals all the way down to every individual. And so
Mm.
that's what's kind of nice about Agile is that yeah, you do your goal setting, and then people are off doing it, and it's very trackable if people are getting their shit done. In fact, if someone's going to get distracted at the office, I prefer that they don't come in. They get home, they just do whatever it is that they needed to get done, and I can see that, and we move forward from there. With marketing, the the digital and tech driven aspects of it, we've been able to track quite well through like an agile or scrum methodology. Setting up infrastructure, the data and the metrics, but the creative aspects of the marketing teams and goals I've never been able to encapsulate well, right? Like website creative refresh, right? The problem is you say that that'll take one time, but you actually are going to refresh it like 4 or 5 times. There's going to be a couple of meetings about it. Someone's not going to like this. It's going to have to be redone, and everyone wants to put in the time to make sure it gets right. You don't want to rush this type of thing. So, like, yeah, the data and analytical sides of marketing, we've been able to manage well through our traditional methodology. The creative side just kind of happens when it happens. And I wish
Yeah.
I had a better approach for that.
We've been looking at like how do you still stay agile and accomplish that goal, especially with our clients, right? Because a lot of our customer base, we're trying to get to the data and we help them with the strategy. And so that creative aspect ends up in their hands a lot of the times, or even another partner of ours hands. So how do you manage that in the agile framework? And it's kind of I guess nitpicky, but it's more like Kanban. So instead of having like true sprints, it's like an iterative Kanban list that just keeps going and going and going. And we've seen that's more effective, or seems to be effective for marketing teams, because it seems less processy and intrusive.
Right.
And Lauren could probably talk to that more better
No,
than I
yeah,
can.
that's what I've seen. Like when I've had to manage, to your point, like all of the data side, like that's very easy from an agile perspective, but creative process is a little bit harder. So it's more of a Kanban approach just to hold people accountable, have some deadlines, understand there's going to be iterations that you can track, and it's helped get things out across the finish line probably a lot faster and on time at the very least. So it's been helpful for us.
What IoT use cases are you currently most excited about? What are you seeing like right now that's like, man, that's fascinating use of the technology? Or what are you seeing as like an emerging trend in the space?
Huh. That's a good question. Thank you. So I often give presentations about IoT, and one picture that I love to show, I call the IoT iceberg. And up above the water is the tip of the iceberg, right? It's the trendy stuff. You got your
Mm.
Apple Watches, you got your motorized scooters, Ring doorbells. All the publicity sits on that thing on the tip of the iceberg. But what I get excited about is the big old boring IoT that sits below the surface of the water. And oftentimes these things sit in areas where you wouldn't see them anyway. So smart building stuff, the stuff that's sitting behind the walls and it's regulating the HVAC or the lighting. I mean, obviously you know a lot about that from your time at Cree. The Internet of Trash collection. There's a lot of stuff happening there. Municipal, like water systems. Um,
Rodent traps, like that's one of my favorite examples.
Rodent traps. Yeah, yeah. The better mousetrap.
Yeah, like
Um,
literal rodent traps. And like we were working with a food safety company, and they were paying, I think it was like two full-time heads to check their pest traps all around their facility. That's their full-time job. So they turned them into Bluetooth devices that's tripped, not tripped, right? So
yeah.
when it shoots a state change up, you know where it is, and it frees up heads to do other stuff.
So here's an example case I think is extremely interesting when we're talking about this world of boring IoT. Fire sprinkler heads inside buildings. So the way they work, there's that little red vial inside, and you probably can visualize that. That's really a heat detector. The liquid expands at a certain temperature and it breaks the glass and the water comes out. So it's a mechanically actuated system. It works quite well. However, they go off in an area that has already gotten hot. So
Mm.
imagine now these things being digitally connected, and you can flow information from one to the other. If there's an advancing flame within a warehouse, say, um, it's burning, and then it gets hot, and then the sprinkler goes off. So if you can communicate to the sprinklers where the flame front is going, you could water down something and kind of like stop a flame front in its tracks before it expands. Um, so I mean that's quite a specific example, but I think it gives this notion of these things that someone wouldn't have thought much about, the opportunities and the cost savings, life savings benefits when you do add connectivity. But then you get jammed into these issues of clearing certifications on these types of products. You have to make sure that anything that you implement is fail safe, right? If your internet is out that day, and there's a fire and the fire sprinklers don't work at all, right? Like that would be extremely bad. So,
Yeah.
so there's new complications as I think the power requirements are getting lighter with stronger processors, better interoperability and connections. So like these things I'm really excited about. The smart home, the smart city, boring old behind the scenes IoT is going to be big.
Is there anything you're saying, like seeing in the boring IoT space, that can maybe trickle up to the tip of the iceberg? Um, for the people who just have an Apple Watch or a smart home, may be interested in, or maybe applicable to them in the near term.
I don't know. I'm jaded, but I'm of the camp that like trendy IoT, like let's just
Hmm.
like wait 3 or 5 years and then we can like resume that. I feel like people have a little bit of tech fatigue in their
Yeah.
home, right? Like there's all these smart devices, you have to have all these different apps, they usually are misbehaving because interoperability is not quite there yet. When Amazon or Google crack the code on having very good voice control, I think that voice will become the de facto operating system in the home to manage everything. And that'll probably be through one of the center consoles, like an Alexa.
Yeah.
But we're still a little bit away from that. When we get there, I think we're going to see another resurgence of the trendy stuff.
I think you're right, and I think like healthcare has a ton of really really interesting IoT use cases. Like from the least sexy, which would be identifying where wheelchairs are. Right, that's a huge use case we see with all these healthcare partners. It's like the analogy they use is like wheelchairs are kind of like geese; they just migrate everywhere, and being able to locate them is tough. But then the voice component, if you're in if you're in a hospital, or let's say you don't have the ability to use your hands and feet, you're paralyzed or you're sick or whatever it is, using voice may be the only tool you have to turn lights on and off in your room, or to summon somebody that can help you, right? So we look at that. We're seeing a lot of it in elderly care facilities, like tracking audio, tracking voice. And then one use case, what was really interesting is using voice in schools for violence detection,
Hmm.
which is an interesting use case, right? So I think everyone's favorite IoT use case in schools, people end up immediately going to gunshot detection, which is pretty easy, right? It's a fast Fourier transform, relatively easy to detect that noise. But when you start getting into, can I determine what the precursors to violence are? Can I determine the precursors to bullying in a school and then alert or notify or stop that before it escalates? That becomes interesting. And that's, microphone driven. And I think as GPT-3 gets better and better, these use cases become um, more applicable, better, and they're no longer the fun kind of toys that you use. They're like real life use cases that can give good outcomes.
Yeah. And that sounds pretty slick to me, but that does merge into that realm of, okay, so now you're in the school, you've got microphones, listening to
Yeah,
people, creating
yeah,
judgments, doing actions because of that. So like that's a domain that, while potentially interesting, I think it's slippery and I think it's hard
yeah.
to roll stuff out that's meaningful in a quick timeline. So that's another one where I think it's like, probably 5 years or more before we kind of figure out how to wrangle this kind of stuff. In the meantime, again, give me that boring old IoT behind the walls.
Yeah.
Do you guys
Ideally
think
non-microphone.
do you guys think IoT has like a PR problem? Like whether it's replacing people like you guys were talking about with mousetraps, or I know we say like we're, give it freeing up their time to do something else, or is it, that creepy line because it has a microphone and you can start observing, hearing people and then recording. And
Minority Report
how do we
1984
change
stuff.
that?
Yeah, so there's certainly a PR problem. I mean, technology in general has always had a PR problem when you talk about jobs replacement. And I think, if you also look at the history of this, there's always been new jobs that have been created. Like technology's never made like the workforce just shrink.
Right.
Um, IoT itself, I don't think will be the long-term buzzword. Partly because it's inaccurate. It is kind of just this mashup of things that are very different depending on the industry that you're in or the department that you're in within an organization. And it's like everything that people don't quite understand well that that relates to setting up these sophisticated systems. Oh, that's the IoT piece called Joe Bob. But like I think it's going to get cordoned off into its respective areas. The term's going to go away, and the term does have some baggage, as you said. Um, and so, yeah, I think that this will all just become products. These will just be
Yeah.
digital hardware products. It's what we're used to. Um, I for one hope that we don't go too far down the surveillance piece. I don't have an Alexa in my house. I might have one. My wife won't let me, and I guess I've just come to terms with that. So, I think that there's a lot of value that comes from the healthcare piece, the smart piece, the energy savings piece,
Yeah.
efficiency piece. But yeah, how IoT will align itself into our lives and the connectivity of ourselves, the social media of every time, all the time. I I don't know where that's going to go. I look at TikTok and what the kids are doing these days, and I'm like, this is a crazy environment. If we add a lot of like connected technology to that as well and have it be always on, I don't know what kind of Pandora's box we're opening up.
It's tough. You have to be benevolent if you're the platform owner creating that, and then it's like, can you trust that the person owning that platform will always be benevolent? And you
Mhm.
can't, right? So it becomes really really challenging. And when we were at Cree, we had the whole team read 1984 and
Mm.
really think through what you're creating. right? You got to think through what the ramifications and what the externalities are of all of this. And the other interesting piece is you talked about the buzzword of IoT, will be even called that. And we had this brainstorm the other day about, maybe it was you. We were talking about the MP3. When's the last time you heard the term
Oh
MP3?
yeah.
Like as soon as a technology starts to really work and become just
The way.
ubiquitous everywhere, the technology term goes away, right?
Yeah.
It's not an MP3 anymore. It's just streaming music. You don't think about it.
Yeah. Well, I am looking for the correct term. So, if you guys ever figure it out or anyone listening knows, like, what are we going to call this? Does it just fade away into what has been the norm before, or is there a real term that's going to come out of it? IoT will persist for some years, but I don't think it's going to be something that becomes mainstream like www. I think it's going to be MP3, and it's going to have its time in the archive.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's actually a really interesting insight. So we're coming up on time. This has been a lot of fun. We could probably nerd out about some of the more technical topics forever, but I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. But we've touched on where you came from, how you got to where you are, growing your businesses, leading your teams. We talked about what you think the future looks like, really, with some of the use cases, what's happening with IoT. And I guess really what it comes down to is through your path, really interesting path. If you could go sit back with yourself and maybe 18 years old, 25 years old, and give yourself some advice to help guide you along the way, what would that conversation look like? What would you tell yourself?
So I'd probably go back to my 18-year-old self. My 25-year-old self would be kind of right as I was getting Breadware started. Now, when I might, kind of hit him on the ears and say, like, listen to your customers a little bit more so we don't go down this path that I told you about. Um, but yeah, at 18, well, I mean, number one, I'd say like buy some Bitcoin. Um,
Yeah. Great advice.
and I'd also say there's going to be a series that comes out in a few years. It's called Game of Thrones. Watch it, but don't bother with season 8. So I think that would be another piece of advice. Um, but honestly, I think I would have recommended to just be an engineer for longer. It's something that like I really had an affinity to when I was growing up, and I really loved being an engineer. But I mean, what would be the word? Angst to because I was very quickly able to see that as an engineer, you're building things, but you're kind of being dictated and directed by the business requirements. And I
Mm-hmm.
also saw the challenges that we were having doing engineering, and I thought kind of naively that I could quickly put together a business solution, solve it. So like I got started just doing entrepreneurship and being on the business side of the house fairly young in my career. Um, which has been good. I mean, it's led to an exciting path, but I think it's also made me a bit of a dilettante, a dabbler. I can speak all the languages, but try and really drill in on Linux kernel stuff. You're going to lose me fast. So I think I would recommend, hey man, you're good at this, enjoy it. Like be an engineer, do it through your 20s, right? And then use that learning to then maybe expand your career set at that point.
That's actually really good advice. Like as I'm thinking back, as we kind of parallel paths in a little bit of ways, and I'm thinking through like, yeah, that's probably advice I would give myself too, because now, when you get to this level, you can't keep up with all the new technologies, all the new stacks. You'd mentioned, the IoT technology stacks and why Ioterra exists to be able to have people that are specialists in each piece of this, be able to deliver solutions for people at, depending on which stage you're at. If you're trying to do that as an individual or as an entrepreneur now and do all of it well, you can't keep up. Like in since we graduated engineering, we were probably learning C++, and then it went to Ruby and Java, and then it went to Python, and now they're teaching kids Go, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's not that long of a time period. And since we've graduated, now all the revision controls moved to Git. Like all these things have changed so quickly. So like once you're out of it, the best you can hope for is to be a dabbler. It's yeah, it's interesting.
I'd tell myself not to get a journalism degree. I think that it's going to be a hard road, but no, it's paid off. It's paid off. But I was like, I would go back and tell myself, maybe study some more math and science, really just stick it out.
Yeah, see, but it's funny. I mean, with what I do in my day to day now, like I wish that I had taken journalism classes, that I had focused more in my writing classes, right? That I had
Mm.
paid attention in my marketing classes and not written it off as like, oh, this is a squishy subject without real answers, and therefore I don't need to listen. So, it's interesting how all of these things become relevant to different phases in our
It's
lives.
true.
I was listening to a book, and they were talking about growth through careers and stuff like that. And when you get to a certain point in careers, almost everyone experiences this. If you're in corporate America, somebody less capable than you ends up getting promoted above you. It happens all the time. And then the question becomes why. It's like, oh, I'm smarter than that person, I'm more capable than that person. That person's probably a better communicator. Like almost invariably, they can be less skilled. And if somebody is a better communicator, can be more engaging, can relay information better, you're going to get better results
Hmm.
across the board. And her journalism background and marketing background has shown that repeatedly, and can take really complicated subjects that we have and distill them down into a message to where somebody like an actual human can absorb it, understand it, and then deploy it. And then we have this if you're aware of something, then and only then can you have, and you get access to it, and then you can take action on it. But if the first two aren't true, like it may as well not exist to you. Right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's
that's,
why
I
we
mean,
make a good team, because you're the data tech engineering guy, and I'm the one who can actually make sense, or at least try to distill it down to folks
Turn
who
it into
may
English.
not be sold on the value just yet.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
yes, that's
The communication piece, that's an extremely good point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it reminded me of this communication four quadrants thing that I've seen in the past. Um, Maybe you've seen various versions of it, but the one I recall, there's four levels of mastery of a topic, and it relates to your communication. So, the first one would be you don't get the topic, you can't explain it because you don't understand it at all. The second would be like you kind of understand it, but you can't communicate it. The third is you do understand it extremely well, and you can communicate just how very complex it is to someone else so that
Yeah.
they have no clue on what it is that you're describing, but you at least understand. Then the fourth one, like true mastery, is you get it and you can explain it in simple terms. um, and it's I often feel that I'm stuck in many of the things I do in that third level where like I mostly get it, but people don't understand when I'm trying to describe it. And so like
Yeah.
trying to up my communication game to be such that I can describe complicated things, all of this data, IoT stuff in simple terms so that it's relevant and interesting to someone who's not in the space.
Mhm.
Um, that's the dream.
And our mutual friend Alex Trader, I think, does an amazing job of that. He can
And
take
he's
these really
fantastic at
complicated
it.
things and deliver it so people can understand not only what it is, but what the value is, with buzzwords not included, right? Which is really great. I like communicating with him about that. So
I think the
last
last
question.
question that we have is my favorite, because I just like to know what other people are listening to. I'm a big podcast fan. So, what podcasts are you listening to? What books are you reading? What music gets you up in the morning? Get moving.
Boy, okay, a lot of stuff there. I guess I've already outed myself as some of a geek during the
Yeah.
podcast, so these probably won't be a
It's a
surprise
safe
then.
space, though. It's okay.
Yeah. I'll start with the music. So I'm a big, for work, tropical house fan.
Okay. I did
Yeah, yeah,
not see that coming,
yeah.
Daniel.
Love tropical house.
Okay.
Like you're doing some work. It's like there's a party on a beach going on down,
You're in
down behind you.
Colombia.
You're in Colombia. I find it very good focused music. Um, Podcasts. So I recently got a subscription to something called Wondrium, which is, I think in the
Mhm.
past was called Great Courses. So it's a lot of these like very well-known college professors that teach these subjects, and they've recorded them and made them really high production value. So
Cool.
it's not a podcast as such, but it's almost like a college course, with maybe a little bit of fluff, but like
Mhm.
very good, like cutting edge science stuff, very good history stuff, a lot of ancient history stuff. So that's been my podcasting circuit. Um, and then as Derek knows, if I get the opportunity and the free time to read a book, it's probably something about like the various like pop physics stuff, pop physics, pop biology, like what's going on at the tip of these domains, spelled down for more of a layperson like me to be able to understand.
Yeah, when we were during the pre-meeting, that was fun. Like our reading lists lined up a little bit too well, which we like to party. What can I say?
Yeah. Guys, I'm sure the life of the party talking about quantum theory and
Quantum
such.
physics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
So
multi-world
so
theory.
one thing that I'm doing, Derek, do you know MIT Open Courses?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's very good what they have there. But I've read so many string theory books now that I'm like, you know what? I need to actually just learn this subject so I can read this and like understand the innards of it. So I'm,
Yeah.
now after a long day of work, I go home and I'm doing like a physics problem set, like trying to, like get through the various MIT courses to be able to understand this stuff. Um, so yeah, uh, it depends on the party, Lauren, but some parties
Yeah.
like it can be the life
Right.
of
I
it.
think it's a party of two, you and Derek just hanging out.
In some of the
I'll meet
stuff
you
we
guys
work on,
later.
in some of the projects that we work on that are data related, I'll try to smuggle in integral calculus even if you don't need it. I'm like, wonder if I can still do this, and just because. And it's no one the benefit of doing that, like the outcome, the same as if I didn't. But I like to be like I paid for the degree.
Damn
I
it,
want to
you
be
can
able to
do
do
it.
it.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Daniel, this
Keep it alive.
has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate you taking the time. Covered a lot of ground today. Love to hear more about what you're doing with Ioterra. Love to follow the journey. And where can we find you? Where can people? We'll link it up in the bio. But where can we find you?
Okay. Well, you can find me in Reno, Nevada. If you're ever around, hit me up and we'll go out. We'll have some fun, have a coffee or some drinks. Ioterra, ioterra.com. And I forget all of our social media handles, but some of them are Ioterra, some of them are Go Ioterra across the different
Cool.
social media realms.
We'll link those.
But yeah,
Yep.
yeah, check it out. And super happy to be on this, guys. Like data, which you're focused on, is both the reason why Ioterra exists, and it's the bane of our existence, and it's what we're trying to wrangle every day to give people good data to make product development decisions. So I think that the work that you're doing, trying to help companies organize and make sense and create data plans is so important. And in the future of Ioterra, like right now, the way in which everything is categorized and ranked is based off of like relatively simple heuristics, like lots of categories, but relatively simple at the end of the day, the formula. I think once we get enough data in there, AI and ML become important for how
Sure.
Ioterra works, and totally a realm I don't know that much about. So we'll have to have a conversation as we get to that point. Maybe NanoChomp can help us.
Yeah, it sounds great. We'd love to. I think those are the conversations we like having. And I'm in the third communication quadrant there, and then Lauren will bring it into to English to how it all makes sense. But again, Daniel, thank you so much. Really nice chatting with you. Have safe travels in the coming weeks, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you very much,
Daniel.
Derek. Thank you, Lauren. This
Thank
was
you.
a lot of fun.